In this video, we're going to talk about the concept of averages. So here's a little scenario I kind of created for this. Let's suppose you survey a group of 5 classmates and you ask them how long it takes them to get to the school. All right. And so let's say these are the answers of the 5 classmates. Okay. 11 minutes, 6 minutes, 20 minutes, 11 minutes, 45 minutes. Okay. And then you wanted to find the average of that, or maybe you were asked to find the average travel time. Most people at this point would probably go through the process of adding these 5 times together and dividing by 5. So let's do that. Let's add them together. 11 plus 6 plus 20 plus 11 plus 45. And grab your calculator because you're going to kind of do this along with me here. Okay, so let's see. And I get 93 when I add them together. Okay, but then I'm going to divide that by 5. Why 5? Well, because 5 people gave an answer. So 93 divided by 5 gives me 18.6. So I'm thinking that the average travel time is 18.6 minutes, at least for this group of students. Now, first of all, we call this method that we just found for finding the average, this is called the mean. All right. Specifically, it's actually called the arithmetic mean, but we'll just call it the mean for simplicity's sake. And the idea is that the mean does the process of you add or you sum the data values together and divide divide by the total observations. I'll say that, observations of the data, meaning how many data values you have. Okay, so that's a way to define what the mean is. And a lot of people like this version of finding an average because it feels like you are taking into account all of the data. So the mean takes into account all of the data. Oops, that's supposed to be a U. Takes into account all of the data. And that's why people kind of gravitate towards it as a way of finding the average. Plus, it feels really mathy, right? The idea you add them up and then divide, that just feels like you're doing math. So somehow this has kind of gained power and traction for that reason. It uses all the data and it kind of has this math feel to it. But there are other ways of finding the mean. All right. And that's what I wanted to kind of discuss. So, I'm sorry, not mean, average. The other ways we can use to find an average, other ways used for average. And in fact, sometimes they're using these for the average, and you're not even necessarily realizing it. One of them in particular, you're not always realizing is being used, and that's the median. The median. And I'm sure at some point in your career you have seen, right? Like this information given to you at some point, probably in your schooling. But let's just refresh our memory, the median. So the median is the middle value of the data. Sorry, when I write a little too fast, the computer has a trouble keeping up with me. So it's the middle value of the data when the data is ordered from smallest to biggest. All right. So it's the middle value. If I wanted to find the median for the data I have up here, okay, 11, 6, 20, 11, 45. Let me put it in order first. So I'd start with the smallest data, which is 6, and I'm gonna drop the writing minutes. And then we have 11 twice, and then 20, and then 45. Okay, that's putting it in order. And the median would be the center value, the middle value. In this case, the middle of those 5 data values is the 11. So for us, we'd be saying that 11 minutes would be a different version of the average. All right, 11 minutes. Now I want to kind of compare this result to what we just got for the mean. So for mean, we got 18.6 minutes. And for the median, we got 11 minutes. Now, here's why I kind of think 18.6 minutes might be a little on the big side. And part of the reason it might be a little bit on the bigger side is because of that 45 minutes that one student gave as their answer. That one data value kind of makes the mean maybe a little bit bigger than it should be compared to the other 4 students, right? I mean, the other 4 students literally get to the school in half the time as the person who goes for 45 minutes, right? So it kind of makes you wonder if maybe the median is a little bit better in this case because it's not affected by the 45. In fact, that's the power of the median. The median is unaffected by what we'll call outliers. So an outlier is a piece of data that doesn't really always account for everybody else's experience, okay? Now, I'm not saying that 45 minutes couldn't be what, more representative of a decent amount of students, but it may not be representative of the majority of the population. In fact, maybe it only represents a very small percent of the population. And in that case, you might start to wonder if they are, in fact, an outlier. Probably not, but they start to become a value that potentially skews the way we look at the data. Maybe more students should be down longer. Maybe we happen to get a group where a bunch of people were living close by, and maybe it actually, in fact, is more representative of the population that they drive further to get to the school. All right. That's kind of the idea between when you look at data, whether or not you might want to use the mean versus the median, whether or not your data does in fact represent what students are experiencing, or if maybe we happen to get a group of students that don't quite represent what everybody else is dealing with. All right. So mean takes into account all the data. That's why we like it. The median, however, is not affected by outliers, and they like it for that reason. In fact, the median gets used a lot. Particularly, it gets used a lot in the case of when you're talking about income, because somebody who's wealthy, their wealthy income could be so much so that it's so much bigger than everybody else's that it kind of skews data really badly. So median often gets used whenever they start talking about income. The other way we can measure average is with mode. Mode looks at the most frequently occurring value. And I kind of noticed when we looked at the data at the beginning, most frequent, hold on, frequently occurring value. Let me write that down before I start talking. Okay. When I looked at the data, I noticed that 11 occurred twice, and it kind of made me feel like, well, 2 students are experiencing that. And then the other two students that are kind of nearby, like, or I should say, one student that's kind of close in value to those is the 6, right? The student who had 6 is not far off from 11, about half. With 20, though, it's about double. So 11 kind of feels like it's in the middle of this group of 4 students. Like 11 actually seems to make sense when you're looking at those 4 data values. The 45, though, kind of throws it off. And in that case, you start to say, all right, should the 45 be included in the data? Does that represent a group of students that isn't being represented normally? Or is that actually representing a group that's too small to be really considered accurate for everybody else? Okay, so in our problem, the mode would be 11 because it's the only one that occurs twice. The mode can happen more than, like, you could have 2 modes. It's possible to have 2 modes. And in the case where you might have 2 modes, you would just list both of them. And if they kind of go beyond 2 modes, they typically just kind of say that the data is multimodal, meaning there's multiple modes, and it starts to become difficult to measure. They might mention the multiple modes. It depends on the scenario. All right. The mode is very simplistic, though. And really where it's useful is when you're really kind of talking about data that maybe you wouldn't have the ability to maybe find the mean or the median even. Maybe it's data that you collect that's kind of like your natural hair color. You go around and ask everybody's natural hair color. In that case, you would be collecting like words, right? Brown, blonde, red, gray, depending on who you're talking to. So it's really good for what we call non-numerical data, data that isn't a number, non-numerical. That's where it's most powerful. Okay. But it can be useful. And it can argue that because both median and mode come out to 11, maybe 11 is the better way of measuring the average for this group. It does kind of depend on whether or not this is really representative of what the student experiences. It does kind of depend on a lot of factors when we decide which average is best. And there you go. That's our understanding of averages.